Welcome to Coffee Break. Thoughtful conversations for a busy world. Let's begin.
You know that incredibly satisfying feeling when a massive, chaotic puzzle finally just snaps together in your mind?
Oh, yeah. The click.
Right. Exactly,
Yep.
the click. It's a feeling we all chase, whether we consciously realize it or not. I mean, think about a time when you were wrestling with a wildly complex problem at work, or maybe navigating a really turbulent phase in a relationship.
Or even just, trying to figure out your own messy life path.
Yes. For weeks, maybe months, you are just wading through ambiguity. It's incredibly uncomfortable. And then suddenly the fog lifts, the pieces align, you look at the situation and you think,
Yeah.
okay, I get it now.
Yeah, the ambiguity just completely evaporates.
It evaporates. And in its place, you feel secure, you feel grounded, you feel certain. It's almost a physical rush of relief, right?
It really is. It's deeply physiological.
But what if I told you that this exact sensation, the very second you feel most secure in your knowledge, the moment you declare a problem solved and a subject mastered, is the exact moment you become the most vulnerable to absolute paralyzing stagnation?
It's a deeply unsettling proposition to wrap our heads around, honestly, because we spend our entire lives, our entire educational journeys, trying to climb out of that uncomfortable, vulnerable valley of not knowing.
Right. We hate being in the valley.
We despise it.
Yeah.
We are conditioned to view that peak of certainty as the ultimate destination. So to suggest that the peak might actually be a trap, a dead end, it really forces us to reevaluate the entire way we approach learning and, living.
And that tension, that friction between the comfort of knowing and the danger of stagnation is exactly what we're unpacking today. We're pulling our insights from a really fascinating piece of source material titled The Paralysis of Certainty.
It's a great piece.
It is. So, the core mission for our deep dive today is to explore the central, completely counterintuitive thesis that certainty literally kills your ability to learn, to adapt, and to grow.
Yeah.
We're going to look at how, assuming you have something completely figured out, whether that's your partner, your career, or your own identity, acts as a hard, unforgiving stop on your development.
A total roadblock.
Exactly. And ultimately, we're going to explore the antidote. We're going to talk about the immense, untapped superpower of looking a complex world in the eye and saying the three most terrifying words in the English language. I don't know.
Which, runs completely counter to the cultural water we all swim in.
Oh, 100%.
We live in a society, and specifically an economic system, that relentlessly rewards us for projecting that we have all the answers. Think about it. The person who speaks first in a meeting and with the most unwavering conviction,
they're the ones who get the promotion.
Right. They get the promotion, the venture capital funding, the millions of followers online. So taking the stance that intellectual vulnerability is actually the true sustainable engine of human development is a massive paradigm shift.
It really is.
We're essentially going to deconstruct the illusion of absolute knowledge today.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start by dissecting the specific phrasing of the source title, the paralysis of certainty. Because when we use the word paralysis in, everyday language, we're talking about a total inability to move.
The physical freezing of the muscles, yeah.
Right. It implies being trapped. So what does it actually mean for a mental state to cause paralysis? Because on the surface, being certain feels empowering, not paralyzing. So how does absolute conviction actually shut down the brain's receptivity to new data?
Well, to understand that, we really have to look at the mechanics of how our cognition actually operates when confronted with the unknown. And we have to view it through the lens of evolutionary biology.
Okay, I love that evolutionary biology angle.
Right. So think of the human brain as an incredibly sophisticated, highly efficient, but fundamentally conservative prediction machine.
Conservative meaning it doesn't want to waste resources.
Exactly. Its primary goal, shaped by millions of years of evolution, is to keep you alive while burning the fewest possible calories. Processing new information, dealing with ambiguity, navigating the unknown that requires an enormous amount of cognitive load.
It takes actual physical energy.
It does. It demands high-level processing in the prefrontal cortex, which is the brain's energy-hungry logic center. It literally burns glucose. It creates physiological stress.
Which makes perfect sense if you place a human being back in our evolutionary environment, you know.
Yes.
If you are foraging on the savannah 50,000 years ago and you hear a sudden sharp rustle in the tall grass.
You do not want ambiguity.
No. You don't want your brain to enter a state of deep philosophical ambiguity. You don't want to stand there pondering the aerodynamics of the wind versus the movement patterns of a saber-toothed tiger.
Right, because you'll get eaten while you're philosophizing.
Exactly. You need a quick, definitive, certain answer so you can trigger a physical reaction. Fight or flight.
And that is the exact mechanism at play. In our evolutionary history, certainty equaled safety. The moment your brain categorized that rustle in the grass as just the wind or definitely a predator, it could stop spending precious energy analyzing the anomaly.
It could just move on to the next potential threat or go back to conserving energy.
Exactly. The brain is constantly trying to turn the unknown into the known so it can automate its responses. When you finally achieve certainty about something, the cognitive process literally freezes. The biological search algorithm terminates.
Search terminated. I like that.
Yeah, the brain essentially says, all right, we've successfully categorized this threat or this concept, file it away. We do not need to expend any more caloric energy looking at it.
So the paralysis is actually a biological feature, not a bug. It's a survival mechanism to keep us from burning out our neural circuits.
It's a brilliant survival mechanism for a hunter-gatherer, but it is a devastating trap for the modern knowledge worker, or really anyone trying to navigate the 21st century.
Because we aren't on the savannah anymore.
Right. The environment we live in now is not the savannah. It's an infinitely complex, constantly shifting landscape of information, global markets, nuanced social dynamics, and rapidly advancing technologies.
And when our ancient brains trigger that search-terminated signal today because we feel entirely certain about, say, a complex political issue or a specific work process, we voluntarily make ourselves blind to any new data that contradicts our static view.
We do. We experience something called confirmation bias on an industrial scale. The paralysis we're talking about is quite literal in a cognitive sense.
Yeah.
The neural pathways dedicated to curiosity, active listening, and adaptation simply shut down.
They just power off.
They do. When new contradictory information presents itself, the brain doesn't just ignore it, it actively repels it. Because processing that new information would require reopening the case, burning more energy, and dealing with the discomfort of being wrong.
Oh, that makes so much sense. It makes me think of an analogy that might make this tangible for the listener. Imagine your mind, and specifically your capacity for curiosity, is like mixing concrete.
Okay, I'm with you.
When you're learning, when you're in that vulnerable state of, I don't know, the concrete is wet, it's churning, it can be poured into entirely new molds, it can flow around unexpected obstacles, it can be shaped to fit the environment. It's highly adaptable.
Yeah, it's fluid.
But the moment you declare, I have this figured out, I am certain, it's like that concrete sets.
I like where you're going with this. Let's take that a step further. What happens to the structural integrity of that concrete once it cures?
Well, once it sets into certainty, it becomes incredibly rigid. It can support a massive amount of weight, which I think perfectly explains why certainty feels so empowering and solid to us emotionally. We build our identities on top of it.
Yep.
But because it's entirely rigid, it loses all ability to adapt to shifting ground. If the Earth moves even a fraction of an inch, say, if a new disruptive technology emerges, or if the cultural environment changes, that solid set concrete cannot bend.
It cracks under the pressure.
Exactly. It shatters. The very thing that made it feel strong is what ultimately destroys it.
That captures the danger perfectly. The friction between a rigid mindset and a changing reality is what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. When the set concrete of our certainty meets the undeniable earthquake of new evidence, it causes immense psychological distress.
It physically hurts. Almost.
It does. And rather than admit the foundation is cracked, people will often just try to patch the concrete, doubling down on their certainty, inventing wild rationalizations to protect their original belief.
And we see the fallout from those cracks everywhere, don't we? It isn't just an abstract philosophical problem. I mean, we see businesses going bankrupt overnight because their leadership was certain about consumer behavior. We see political systems deadlocked.
Out everywhere.
But even more intimately, we see this playing out in the daily lives of the listener, which brings us to the core of what the source material explores. This concrete of certainty doesn't just get poured over abstract concepts like macroeconomic theory. It gets poured over the most vital, dynamic parts of our everyday existence.
Exactly. The text highlights 3 specific arenas where the paralysis of certainty is most devastating: our relationships with other people, our professional careers, and our perception of ourselves.
Okay, we definitely need to spend some real time dismantling each of these.
We do, because the mechanisms at play in each arena are slightly different, even if the root cause, the biological desire for cognitive safety, is the same.
All right, let's dig into the first arena, our relationships. The source text argues that the moment you think you know everything about a person, growth stops. And this doesn't just mean your own growth. It implies the growth of the relationship itself terminates.
Yes.
How does this biological desire for certainty actually poison our interpersonal dynamics?
It manifests as a phenomenon we can call relational blindness. To understand it, think about the trajectory of a long-term relationship. This could be a marriage, a deep friendship that has lasted decades, or even a long-standing working relationship with a co-founder. In the beginning, during the formative stages, the entire relationship is powered by intense curiosity. You are actively discovering this person. You ask them deep, probing questions. You observe how they react to stress, how they express joy. Your brain is eagerly gathering data to construct an understanding of who they are.
Using the previous analogy, the concrete is very wet. You're fluidly adapting to every new thing you learn about them.
Yes, and that fluidity creates intimacy. But as the years go by, your brain, always looking to conserve energy, remember, takes all that data and builds a finalized mental model of who this person is. It crystallizes them.
It sets the concrete.
Exactly. You start to formulate absolute certainties. My partner is terrible with money, or my boss is a micromanager who hates risk, or my sibling is the irresponsible one in the family. Once that mental model solidifies into certainty, a profound shift happens. You actually stop interacting with the living, breathing, evolving human being in front of you.
Wait, you start interacting with the avatar of them that lives inside your own head.
That is the exact tragedy of it. You interact with a static, historical record of who they were 5 or 10 years ago. But human beings are not static objects. We are incredibly dynamic systems. We're constantly evolving based on new experiences, shifting biological realities, traumas we endure, and successes we achieve.
Yeah.
The person you married at 25 is neurologically and emotionally not the same person at 40.
Oh man, I have actually experienced this from the other side, and it is incredibly frustrating.
Really? How so?
Yeah, I have a friend I've known since high school, and for a long time in my late teens, I was very anxious, very hesitant to take risks. Now, as an adult, I've started businesses, I travel solo, I am a completely different person in terms of risk tolerance.
Right.
But whenever I talk to this friend, they still treat me like that fragile teenager. They offer unsolicited advice to protect me from risks I'm completely comfortable taking. They are absolutely certain they know my limits, and because of that, our conversations feel incredibly shallow. I can't share my actual life with them because it conflicts with their certainty about who I am.
That is a perfect real-world example of relational blindness. Your friend's certainty isn't malicious. It's a cognitive shortcut they built years ago that they refuse to update. But look at the result. It isolates you.
It really does. It's lonely.
When you are absolutely certain you know someone, you stop asking them genuine questions. If your partner suddenly expresses an interest in something wildly out of character, instead of being curious and asking, wow, what brought this on, you might get dismissive or even frustrated because they aren't conforming to the mold you poured for them.
The implication here is massive. We tend to think that certainty in a relationship provides stability. We say things like, we know each other inside and out, and we wear it as a badge of honor.
We do.
But this framework suggests that this kind of certainty actually guarantees that you will slowly drift apart, because one person is inevitably evolving, while the other person's perception of them is frozen in time. You're literally denying them the permission to grow, at least within the confines of your relationship.
And as your anecdote illustrates, people feel it when they're being put in a box. There's nothing more suffocating than being deeply tethered to someone who leaves no room for you to surprise them, to change your mind, or to contradict their expectations.
So how do we fix it?
To keep a relationship alive, you have to constantly shatter the concrete. You have to wake up and look at your partner of 20 years and consciously tell yourself, I do not fully know this person today. Let me find out who they are this morning.
That is a beautiful but incredibly demanding way to approach love and friendship. It requires constant, active energy.
It does. It's not the path of least resistance.
No, definitely not. Let's pivot from the personal to the professional. We've talked about how certainty suffocates people. Now let's look at the second arena the source material identifies, the workplace.
Oh, yes.
The assertion here is that the moment you think you have your job completely figured out is the exact moment you become obsolete.
Professional certainty. It's the silent, creeping killer of careers and entire industries. It's what happens when a worker, or a company, transitions from a mindset of discovery to a mindset of preservation.
No, I have to push back on this because I think a listener might be feeling the same friction I am.
Go for it.
Isn't the entire goal of a career, especially in a specialized field, to achieve absolute mastery? I mean, if I am lying on an operating table waiting for open heart surgery, or if I'm strapping into seat 14B on a transatlantic flight through a thunderstorm, I do not want a surgeon or a pilot who embraces the unknown.
Right, you don't want them guessing.
Exactly. I don't want someone who looks at the scalpel and says, I don't know, let's just see what happens today. I want them to be absolutely, terrifyingly certain that they know exactly what they are doing. So how do we reconcile the necessity of deep expertise with the idea that certainty is a paralyzing trap? Where is the line?
That is a brilliant pushback, and it highlights a crucial distinction that we have to make. The difference lies in separating foundational mastery from intellectual rigidity.
Okay, unpack that. Foundational mastery versus intellectual rigidity.
They look similar from the outside, but their internal mechanisms are entirely different. Foundational mastery is about deeply knowing the mechanics, the physics, the established procedures, and the historical data of your craft.
Yeah.
The surgeon absolutely must have a certain understanding of human anatomy.
Right.
The pilot must have absolute certainty about the aerodynamics of the aircraft and the function of the instrument panels. That is the non-negotiable baseline of competence.
So certainty at the foundational operational level is not just healthy, it's required for survival.
Required, absolutely. But intellectual rigidity, the dangerous, paralyzing certainty the source material is warning against, is the belief that because you have mastered the foundation, the entire field is now a closed system. Rigidity is believing there is no room for systemic improvement, no new techniques left to learn, and no anomalous situations that could ever challenge your existing mental models.
So the bad surgeon says, I have performed this specific appendectomy 10,000 times. I know exactly how it goes, my way is the best way, and I do not need to read this new research paper on robotic assistance.
Yes, that's the paralysis. And the tree master surgeon, the one who continues to grow, says, I have done this 10,000 times, which gives me the muscle memory and the baseline skill to keep the patient safe. But I am intensely hungrily curious about how this new robotic tool might allow me to do the same procedure with a 1% better recovery rate.
Wow.
They are masters of the known, but they remain deeply, humbly respectful of the vastness of the unknown.
There's a concept from Zen Buddhism that maps perfectly onto this, isn't there? Shoshin.
Exactly, Shoshin, which translates to beginner's mind. The core teaching is, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few.
In the expert's mind, there are few.
The paralysis of certainty in a career happens when you allow the expert's mind to shut off your receptivity to innovation. You see this play out in corporate culture constantly, often with catastrophic results. I'd argue the most dangerous sentence in the English language is, we have always done it this way.
Oh, we have always done it this way. You hear that, and you can practically hear the corporate concrete cracking. I'm immediately thinking of the classic business case studies like Blockbuster or Kodak.
Those are the perfect illustrations of this exact paralysis. Take Blockbuster. They had absolute foundational mastery of the video rental logistics business. They knew exactly how to run retail stores, how to manage inventory, how to optimize late fees. They were certain they understood the American consumer.
And because they were so certain that their model was the ultimate end state of home entertainment, they looked at a fledgling company like Netflix, who at the time was just mailing DVDs in red envelopes, and they laughed.
They did.
They had the opportunity to buy Netflix for a fraction of what it's worth today, and they passed. Why? Because the idea of streaming video or subscription models without late fees, it didn't fit into their set concrete.
Their absolute certainty blinded them to the shifting ground of broadband internet and changing consumer preferences. The foundation they mastered became the very thing that crushed them. That is the danger of professional certainty.
It's hubris, really.
It breeds a hubris that makes you incapable of recognizing when the rules of the game have changed. To survive in any career today, you have to operate with a dual mindset. Absolute confidence in your ability to learn, combined with absolute humility about how much you actually currently know.
Which is a remarkably difficult balance to strike. And I think that difficulty is magnified tenfold when we look at the third and final arena identified by the source text. We've talked about the danger of being certain about other people and being certain about our jobs, but the most intimate and Honestly, the most intimidating arena is ourselves. The text states that the moment you think you know everything about yourself, growth definitively stops.
This is the profound, insidious danger of self-certainty. And if we look back at the overarching thesis of the material, how certainty kills your ability to learn and grow, this is where the casualty count is the highest.
I think this one hits incredibly close to home for almost everyone listening right now. We all walk around carrying these massive, heavy, declarative identity statements.
We do. We wear them like armor.
We really do. We say things like, I'm just not a math person, or I'm terrible at public speaking, or I have a bad memory, or even deeper character judgments like, I'm just an anxious person, this is just how my brain is wired. We state these things about ourselves with absolute unyielding certainty.
And by doing so, we essentially act as both the architect and the warden of our own psychological prison. The real danger of these declarative statements about the self is that they wear a very convincing disguise. They masquerade as deep self-awareness.
Oh, that is a sharp insight. We think we're being emotionally intelligent and realistic. We think, I'm mature enough to know my limitations.
Exactly. You think you're being practical by saying, I'm not a creative person, so I won't volunteer for this design project? But in reality, you're just foreclosing on your own potential to avoid the discomfort of being a beginner. You're confusing a temporary behavioral pattern or a painful past experience with a fixed, immutable identity.
Can we break down the mechanics of how that fixed identity actually forms? Because nobody is born believing they are inherently bad at math or inherently uncreative.
No, of course not. It almost always traces back to an early experience of failure or humiliation, combined with the brain's desire to protect the ego. Let's take the I'm not a math person example. Imagine you're 12 years old, struggling with algebra. You get called up to the chalkboard, you freeze, the class laughs, and the teacher makes you feel foolish.
Ugh, the worst feeling.
It's an incredibly painful, high-stress event for a child's nervous system. The amygdala is firing on all cylinders.
So the brain intervenes to stop the pain.
Yes. The brain, seeking safety and an end to the cognitive distress, categorizes that experience. It creates a new certainty. I am not a math person. The moment you adopt that certainty, the pain stops. You no longer have to feel inadequate when you fail a math test because it's simply a fixed trait of your identity. You can't be blamed for it. That certainty successfully protected your fragile ego in the 8th grade.
But then we fast forward 20 years, you're a 30-something professional, and that same exact certainty, which was built as a defense mechanism, is now a massive liability.
Huge one.
It prevents you from trying to learn how to code, or from taking control of your own financial investments, or from pivoting into a more analytical, higher-paying career path. The paralysis is complete.
Precisely. You become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because you are certain of your limitation, you never attempt the tasks that could prove you wrong. You never gather the new data that would shatter the concrete. The tragedy of self-certainty is that you die without ever discovering the vast reserves of capability that were locked away behind a single, poorly constructed sentence you told yourself decades ago.
It is incredibly sobering when you lay it all out like that. We're talking about a cognitive mechanism that isolates us from our loved ones, blinds us to professional innovation, and traps us in stunted, limited versions of ourselves.
Yeah, it's a heavy realization.
If the paralysis of certainty is this deeply ingrained in our biology and our psychology, how do we possibly break out of it? What is the antidote to a poison that our own brain produces to protect us?
This is where the source text makes a fascinating pivot. It moves from the diagnosis of the disease to the prescription for the cure. And it offers a solution that is remarkably simple in its phrasing, yet terrifyingly difficult in its execution. Cultivating the superpower of saying, I don't know.
I really want to unpack the sociological weight of those 3 words. Why does the text elevate I don't know to the status of a superpower? Because in almost every professional, academic, or social setting we navigate, saying I don't know is framed as a massive weakness.
Oh, totally.
It's framed as a defeat. If you say it in a job interview, you seem unprepared. If you say it in a debate, you lose. It's viewed as an admission of ignorance.
Cloning it as a superpower requires a fundamental psychological reframe. We have to shift our understanding of I don't know from a defensive posture of failure to an active, aggressive, and highly strategic stance of empowerment. To understand why it works, think about what happens internally when you are asked a difficult question and you don't know the answer, but you try to fake it.
Your heart rate spikes.
Yeah.
You start spinning your wheels, using jargon, trying to bluff your way through.
Right. In that moment, 100% of your cognitive energy is entirely focused on protecting your ego and managing how other people perceive you. You're playing defense. You are terrified of being found out. And when your brain is entirely consumed with defensive threat mitigation, it is biologically incapable of learning anything new. The aperture is closed.
But the moment you take a breath, drop the facade, and say out loud, I honestly do not know what happens.
A profound, instantaneous psychological shift occurs. You instantly remove the defensive posture. The ego is taken completely out of the equation because you already admitted the very thing you were trying to hide. The threat is neutralized. And what happens when you remove the ego and the pretense? You open up a void.
A void that actively demands to be filled with actual truth rather than defensive spin.
Exactly. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does human curiosity once the ego is out of the way. By admitting you do not know, you are implicitly stating, but I am ready to find out. You immediately shift your status from being a static, defensive repository of outdated facts to being an active, dynamic learning engine. That is why it's a superpower. It is the master key that unlocks the paralysis of certainty.
I want to extrapolate this out and look at the actual power dynamics of vulnerability in leadership because I think it's fascinating. Let's imagine a high-stakes corporate environment. Picture a boardroom where a CEO is being grilled by the board of directors about an unexpected, catastrophic drop in quarterly earnings. Usually, what do you get in that scenario?
You get the illusion of certainty. You get aggressive spin. The CEO will use dense financial jargon. They will shift the blame to macroeconomic factors or a specific underperforming department, and they will project absolute, unwavering certainty that their current strategy will right the ship.
Exactly. It's a theater of competence. But imagine a world where, I don't know, was actually treated as the highest form of intellectual honesty and leadership. What if that same CEO looked at the board and said, I do not know exactly why the market reacted this way. Our current predictive models completely failed to capture this trend. My previous certainties were wrong. So we need to completely reassess our foundational assumptions, and I need this team's help to go figure it out.
The initial shock in that room would be palpable. The silence would be deafening. But think about the culture that kind of vulnerability would create over the long term.
It would completely change the incentive structure of the company.
It would. Because if the leader at the very top models that it is psychologically safe to not have all the answers, it gives everyone else in the organization permission to stop pretending. You would eliminate the millions of hours wasted in the corporate world on employees trying to hide their mistakes or justify bad decisions they made out of a false sense of certainty.
It's so true.
By saying, I don't know, the leader actually transfers agency to the team. They turn a moment of failure into a collaborative mission of discovery. Research in organizational psychology consistently shows that leaders who express intellectual humility actually engender far more trust and loyalty than those who project infallible omissions.
We see the toxic alternative to this most clearly in politics, don't we? The modern political landscape is the ultimate arena of toxic, paralyzing certainty. Every politician is required to be absolutely, unwaveringly certain that their platform is the only path to salvation, and that the other side is not just wrong, but actively malicious.
And look at the complete paralysis that creates in governance. Complex sociological problems cannot be solved with rigid ideological certainty. If a political leader were to stand at a podium and say, healthcare is an incredibly complex, multi-layered system, and I do not have the perfect, flawless solution, but here is the process we will use to experiment, gather data, and adapt, they would likely be crucified by the media as weak and indecisive.
They'd be torn apart.
Yet historically, if you look at the leaders who successfully navigated the greatest existential crises like FDR during the Depression or Lincoln during the Civil War, they were highly adaptable pragmatists. They were constantly updating their mental models based on new intelligence. They were not paralyzed by their own dogma.
It points to a grand irony about intelligence that I have noticed in my own life, and I'm sure you've seen it too. The genuinely smartest people I know, the ones who are true world-class experts in their respective fields, are almost always the quickest to admit what they do not understand. They say, I don't know, constantly.
What you're observing is a well-documented psychological phenomenon. It connects back to the Dunning-Kruger effect. But let's actually unpack what that means because it gets thrown around a lot.
Please do, because I think people often use it just to mean stupid people don't know they are stupid, which is a bit reductive.
Yeah. It is reductive. The Dunning-Kruger effect describes a cognitive bias where people with very low ability or knowledge in a specific area overestimate their competence. Because they know so little about the subject, they don't even possess the baseline knowledge required to recognize how much they are missing. They see a complex issue, they grasp one superficial data point, and they feel absolute aggressive certainty that they understand the whole picture.
So ignorance actually breeds certainty.
Yes. But as you travel further along the curve of learning, as you actually start to study the subject deeply, your confidence plummets. Why? Because the more you learn, the more you realize how incredibly vast and nuanced the ocean of the unknown truly is. You discover edge cases, conflicting data, historical context. The true expert, the person who has dedicated decades to a topic, is the one who says, well, it is highly complicated. I cannot say for sure, but here's what the current flawed data suggests, and I reserve the right to change my mind tomorrow. True expertise destroys absolute certainty.
So saying, I don't know, is the hammer that shatters the concrete. It removes the ego and opens the door to the unknown. But we have to ask a practical question here. Admitting ignorance is a momentary action. It's a spark. What is the engine that actually drives you through that door once you open it? How do you keep the concrete from just setting again 5 minutes later? It requires a sustained state of mind.
And that leads us to the final, and perhaps most vital, directive of our source material. Cultivating the habit of curiosity. The text doesn't just say, admit you don't know and then walk away.
Yeah.
It explicitly links the admission of I don't know with the ongoing action of staying curious. And I think we need to frame curiosity correctly here because we tend to infantilize the concept.
We do. We treat curiosity like it's a fleeting childhood trait. We think of a toddler asking, why is the sky blue? Or we think of curiosity as a passive mood that occasionally strikes us when we happen to watch a really good documentary on a Sunday afternoon.
But in the context of combating the biological and psychological paralysis of certainty, curiosity cannot be a passive mood. It must be a rigorous, deliberate, almost athletic discipline. If we dissect how curiosity functions conceptually, it is the direct, structural opposite of certainty. Think about it grammatically. Certainty is a period at the end of a sentence. It's a full stop. The thought is complete. Do not add anything else.
The search algorithm is terminated. End of discussion.
Right. Curiosity, on the other hand, is a question mark. It inherently implies that the thought is incomplete. It's an active, ongoing seeking of new information, contrary perspectives, and deeper context. When you are operating in a state of certainty, you are a closed system. Nothing gets in. When you are operating in a state of rigorous curiosity, you are an open system. You are actively metabolizing the world around you.
I love the conceptual clarity of that, but I want to bring this down to the ground floor for the listener. How do we practically apply this? Because it's very easy for the two of us to sit here in a calm environment, speaking into microphones and philosophize about the virtues of being an open system. But tomorrow morning, a listener is going to be sitting in a highly stressful project management meeting, or they're going to get into a heated political argument with their father-in-law, and that ancient evolutionary desire for the safety of certainty is going to kick in hard. The amygdala is going to hijack the brain. What is the practical, actionable tool they can use in that exact moment?
The practical application requires developing a deep self-awareness of the physiological science of certainty. We talked earlier about how certainty is a biological response to stress. Because it is biological, it comes with physical symptoms.
Let's talk about that physical feeling, the feeling of being absolutely burning with certainty during a conflict, because you can literally feel it in your body.
You absolutely can, and you have to learn to recognize it as a warning sign. Think about the last time you were in a heated argument where you knew you were right. You feel a tightness in your chest. Your heart rate elevates. You might feel a flush of heat in your face or a rushing sound in your ears. Your focus narrows to a tunnel. Your voice gets a little louder, a little sharper. You find yourself interrupting the other person because you are not actually listening to them. You are just reloading your own argument.
You feel a desperate, almost aggressive need to assert your reality over theirs.
Exactly. We usually interpret that physical sensation as the righteous power of our own intellectual superiority, but it's not. That physiological cascade is the biological alarm bell of the paralysis of certainty setting in. It's your nervous system preparing for a fight, shutting down your prefrontal cortex, and locking you into a rigid defensive posture.
Okay, so the practical advice for the listener is this. The next time you feel that specific physical sensation, that hot, rigid, desperate need to be right, to interrupt and to declare your certainty, you have to use that exact physical feeling as a trigger for a new behavior.
Yes. Instead of letting that heat push you to make a declarative statement, you use the heat as a cue to force yourself to stop. Take a physical breath to regulate the nervous system, and then Force yourself to ask one genuinely curious question.
One genuine question, not a rhetorical question designed to trap the other person, like, how could you possibly believe something so stupid?
No, a real, open-ended question that proves you are an open system. Can you help me understand the specific experiences that led you to that conclusion? Or, I'm clearly missing something here. What data are you looking at that I'm not? Or, if you can't bring yourself to ask them, ask yourself internally. Why is this specific topic triggering such a massive physiological need for me to be right?
That is incredibly powerful. You're essentially using the physical symptom of the disease as the trigger to administer the antidote. It turns the biology back on itself.
And if we pull back and look at the macro picture, mastering this specific discipline, the discipline of intercepting your own certainty with curiosity, is arguably the most vital intellectual survival skill for the 21st century.
More vital than actually knowing the answers.
Far more vital. Think about the era we are living in. We are drowning in an unprecedented, endless flood of information. The volume of data generated by humanity every single day is staggering. In the past, in the 20th century, the smartest person in the room was usually the one who had memorized the most facts. They had the most certainty stored in their head. They were the human encyclopedia.
Because access to information was scarce. If you knew the tax code by heart or the engineering formulas, you have massive value.
Exactly. But today, having the answers is cheap. It is a commodity. Every single person listening to this has immediate wireless access to the entirety of human knowledge on a piece of glass in their pocket. Artificial intelligence systems can synthesize terabytes of information and generate answers faster than any human brain ever could.
So if having the answers is no longer the premium skill, what is?
The greatest intellectual advantage in the modern world is not knowing the right answers. It is knowing how to ask the right questions. It's the ability to navigate immense ambiguity without panicking. It's the ability to look at a complex shifting data set or a chaotic global market or a messy relationship and have the confidence to say, I do not know what this means yet, but I have the tools to inquire about it. Curiosity is the only navigational tool that actually works in a landscape where the map is constantly being redrawn. Certainty anchors you to the past. Curiosity pulls you into the future.
So what does this all mean for us day to day? We have covered a tremendous amount of ground in this deep dive. We started by unpacking the deep evolutionary biology behind why the paralysis of certainty feels so good, yet fundamentally kills our growth. We explored how pouring that mental concrete destroys our relationships by trapping our partners in static, outdated molds. We looked at how it makes us professionally obsolete by blinding us to innovation and chaining us to the way we've always done it. And, most tragically, we examine how certainty creates self-imposed psychological prisons where we declare, this is just who I am, I cannot change.
But we didn't just diagnose the problem. We explored the difficult, demanding way out.
We did. We talked about claiming the terrifying, liberating superpower of saying, I don't know. Using that admission not as a surrender to ignorance, but as the starting line for a rigorous, disciplined practice of curiosity. It's about intentionally replacing the period at the end of your thoughts with a question mark. It's not a one-time fix. It's a lifelong, daily practice of wrestling with your own ego. But it's the only way to remain a vibrant, dynamic, and growing human being in an increasingly complex world.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the source material of The Paralysis of Certainty, we want to leave you with something to really chew on as you go about the rest of your day. We spent a lot of time analyzing the psychology and the abstract concepts, but let's bring it right back home to your reality, to your life right now. I want you to think about the one thing in your life right now that you are absolutely, undeniably, 100% certain about. It could be a deeply held limiting belief about your own capabilities. It could be a long-standing bitter grievance you hold against a friend or a family member. Or maybe it's a rock-solid conviction about how your industry works or how a political issue should be solved. Identify that one solid, load-bearing pillar of certainty in your mind. Now ask yourself, what if that specific, unshakable certainty is the exact thing causing your greatest paralysis? What would happen if, just for today, you looked at that unyielding belief, let go of your need to be right, and simply whispered, I don't know.
Thanks for spending this time with us on Coffee Break. If this conversation stayed with you, you can find more episodes here on the channel. Until next time, take care.